Usually, when we picture someone lifting heavy weights, the mental image is entirely focused on the visible external muscles.
Right, the bulging biceps, the sweeping quads, the broad shoulders.
Exactly. Fitness culture tends to celebrate building this strong, imposing exterior armor,
We definitely prioritize the muscles we can actually flex and, admire in a mirror.
while completely ignoring the internal structures that make that movement possible in the first place.
Oh, 100%.
Well, today, we are flipping that entire perspective upside down and looking really closely at the hidden architecture of the human body. Because for you, the curious learner who is always looking for a shortcut to being well informed, we have a highly specific but incredibly important mission for today's deep dive.
We do. We're exploring a question that completely challenges traditional, old-school fitness advice.
Right, which is can resistance training actually support pelvic floor recovery?
And this specific question impacts a massive portion of the population. Unfortunately, it's shrouded in this dense veil of embarrassment, silence, and, frankly, a significant amount of outdated medical advice that tells people to just stop moving altogether.
Yeah, to just avoid it. But to cut through all that noise, we pulled together a really comprehensive stack of sources. We're examining clinical practice guidelines from the VA and the Department of Defense.
We've also got modern physical therapy protocols from Hinge Health, Origin Physical Therapy, and Empowered Wellness.
Plus, we're cross-referencing all of that with medical advice from the British Association of Urological Surgeons and the Continence Foundation of Australia.
So it is a very thorough look at a part of the human anatomy that most people only ever start thinking about when something goes fundamentally wrong.
Right. The traditional advice of, just do your Kegels and avoid heavy lifting at all costs is getting a major evidence-based update. By the end of this deep dive, the biomechanical truth about weightlifting and pelvic health is going to reveal some highly surprising mechanics.
It'll probably change how you view your next trip to the gym.
I think so too. But to understand why the medical consensus is shifting, we really have to start with the foundational anatomy.
Right, let's lay the groundwork. Our sources use some very specific, vivid imagery to describe the pelvic floor.
They do. Functionally, it is this complex web of muscles and connective tissue located right at the base of the pelvis, right?
Yes, spanning from the pubic bone in the front to the tailbone in the back. And the clinical guidelines often describe it as acting like a hammock, a sling, or even a bowl.
So it's essentially a muscular hammock physically holding up your internal organs against the force of gravity.
Exactly. And according to the VA and DoD guidelines, this muscular sling provides the critical, non-negotiable support for your bladder, your bowel, and for women, the uterus.
But it's much more than just a passive shelf catching your organs.
Oh, absolutely. These muscles play active, key roles in sexual function, and they are the ultimate gatekeepers for continence, actively contracting and relaxing to control the release of urine and feces.
Thinking about the body as a machine, I keep coming back to this analogy of a car's underlying suspension system.
Oh, okay.
Because if that suspension system is worn out or compromised, it really doesn't matter how shiny the paint job is or, how much horsepower the engine has.
Right. Every time you drive over a pothole, the chassis just takes a total beating.
Exactly. And everything riding on top of it feels the shock. The whole structure becomes vulnerable to damage.
That visual perfectly captures the functional reality. When that biological suspension system is compromised, whether that happens from childbirth, chronic coughing, chronic constipation and straining, or just age and general inactivity, the traditional medical response has leaned heavily toward extreme caution.
We see this so clearly in the guidelines from the Royal Berkshire Hospital, which explicitly advise patients against heavy lifting.
They don't just say, be mindful of your form. They literally tell patients to avoid the activity entirely.
They warn patients to steer clear of running, jumping, and they specifically call out deep squats.
The biomechanical reasoning they use is that these high-impact activities, or lifting heavy loads, generate immense downward force directly onto that vulnerable pelvic floor.
So if the hammock is already frayed, the traditional logic dictates that you shouldn't throw a bowling ball into it.
That's the traditional logic, yes.
Okay, well, let's unpack this, because this is where the traditional logic seems to hit a massive wall for me. The pelvic floor is made of skeletal muscle tissue, just like a bicep or a hamstring.
Yes, exactly the same type of muscle.
And we know, as a fundamental law of physiology, that muscles require resistance and load to get stronger and adapt. I mean, if you break your arm and put it in a cast for 6 months, the muscle atrophies into nothing.
It completely wastes away.
Doesn't the pelvic floor do the exact same thing if we just stop using it and avoid lifting anything heavier than a grocery bag?
And that is the exact question modern sports medicine and physical therapy are finally starting to ask.
So what does the new data say?
The answer we are getting back represents a massive paradigm shift in how we treat pelvic health. According to the latest insights from Hinge Health and guidelines from NICE, that's the National Institute for Health and Care, excellence weightlifting does not inherently cause pelvic floor dysfunction.
Wow, so the barbell itself isn't the bad guy here.
The tool is completely neutral. NICE actually highlights a recent fascinating study showing that weight training, when properly combined with pelvic floor muscle training, can actively improve symptoms of urinary incontinence.
That feels completely counterintuitive to the don't lift heavy rule we've been handed for decades.
It requires a total shift in perspectives. The real villain in this scenario isn't the physical iron you're picking up off the floor.
What is it then?
The villain is unmanaged intra-abdominal pressure.
Okay, walk me through what intra-abdominal pressure actually looks like in practice.
Think of your core not just as a set of abs, but as a pressurized sealed canister.
A canister, okay.
The diaphragm is the lid at the top. The abdominal muscles wrap around to form the sides, and the pelvic floor serves as the base.
Got it.
When you prepare to lift something heavy, your deep core and your diaphragm compress to stabilize your spine. That creates a massive spike in downward pressure inside the canister.
And physics dictates that all that internal pressure has to go somewhere.
Exactly. And your pelvic floor is biologically designed to handle this exact pressure. It is built to adapt to it, stretch slightly, and push back, provided it is conditioned properly and firing on time.
Hinge Health points out a really crucial detail here. They say symptoms like leaking urine or feeling of heaviness usually don't happen simply because the pelvic floor is irreparably broken or weak.
Right. They happen when the pelvic floor isn't firing at the correct millisecond. It's often a neuromuscular coordination issue rather than just a pure strength deficit.
I'm picturing the habits you see every single day at the gym. Like when people walk up to a heavy deadlift, the very first thing they do is take a massive gulp of air, hold it in their cheeks, and suck their stomach in as hard as humanly possible before they pull.
The Valsalva maneuver. It's incredibly common in powerlifting to create core rigidity.
But if you are treating your core like a pressure cooker, holding your breath or aggressively sucking your stomach in is the equivalent of sealing the lid shut with no release valve.
Yes.
You pull on that weight, the internal pressure spikes exponentially, and because it can't escape upward through an exhale or outward because you are actively sucking your abs in, all of that force gets driven straight down.
It seeks the path of least resistance. If your pelvic floor is the weakest link in that anatomical canister, the downward force just overwhelms the hammock.
And in the short term, you experience a leak. Over the long term, chronically exposing a weak pelvic floor to that unmanaged pressure can contribute to conditions like pelvic organ prolapse. So, if the root problem is unmanaged pressure blowing out the bottom of the canister, how do we fix the mechanics? I mean, how do I lift the heavy thing without destroying the suspension system?
The solution, detailed across almost all our physical therapy sources, comes down to the mechanics of a safe lift. The absolute golden rule is mastering what Hinge Health calls the piston effect of breathing.
The piston effect. I am trying to visualize a piston in an engine, but how does that map onto human lungs and muscles?
You have to sync the movement of your diaphragm and your pelvic floor so they travel vertically together.
Ugh.
When you take a deep breath in, your diaphragm actively drops down toward your stomach to create a vacuum and let air into your lungs.
And to safely accommodate all that downward movement and pressure, your pelvic floor must relax and lower at the exact same time.
Yes. The inhale means relax and drop down. Then the mechanism reverses. When you exhale, the diaphragm rises back up into the chest cavity, pushing the air out. As it rises, the pressure decreases, and the pelvic floor should gently contract and lift upwards into the pelvis. They move in perfect unison.
Down together on the inhale, up together on the exhale.
Exactly.
Let's apply this to a real-world scenario. Let's say I'm at the bottom of a heavy goblet squat. My hips are below my knees. What should my breathing be doing?
The rule of thumb in physical therapy is to exhale on the exertion. You forcefully blow the air out during the hardest mechanical part of the lift.
So during that goblet squat, you inhale smoothly as you lower your body down, allowing the pelvic floor to relax and yield to the downward pressure.
Right. Then, as you drive your heels into the floor to stand back up, you forcefully exhale.
And that exhale causes the diaphragm lid to lift, which naturally assists the pelvic floor in contracting upward to handle the load of the weight, managing the pressure perfectly.
Yes, you are literally using your breath as the release valve.
But the breath doesn't work in isolation, does it?
No, our sources emphasize that the pelvic floor is just one player in a broader biomechanical system. Origin Physical Therapy and Empowered Wellness both dive deep into the importance of the supporting cast.
The supporting cast. Origin PT talks specifically about the transversus abdominis, or the TVA. They call it the body's natural shapewear, which is a fantastic way to describe it.
It really is. The TVA is the deepest layer of your abdominal muscles. Unlike your six-pack muscles, which just pull you forward into a crunch, the TVA wraps entirely around your torso.
Like a muscular corset tightening around your spine.
Exactly. When you engage the TVA properly, it draws in your waist and increases stability across your whole lumbar spine and pelvis.
The sources explain that when the TVA is strong and responsive, it works in harmony with the pelvic floor to create this incredibly rigid, safe foundation for heavy lifting.
Expanding on that bigger picture of biomechanics, there is another crucial member of the supporting cast that most people completely overlook when talking about pelvic health, which is the glutes. The Empowered Wellness source refers to the glutes and the pelvic floor as a match made in heaven.
See, I've always thought of glutes purely in terms of aesthetics or just generating power for a sprint. I'm struggling to see the biomechanical link between your backside and the muscles of your pelvic floor.
The link is all about force transfer and stabilization. Your glutes are the massive powerhouse muscles responsible for transferring kinetic forces between your upper and lower body.
So when you lift a weight, jump, or even just cough, your glutes are supposed to instantly engage to stabilize your pelvis.
Right. When they do their job, they absorb a huge amount of the physical shock, significantly reducing the direct downward pressure on the pelvic floor.
But we sit at desks all day, which notoriously weakens the glutes. If your glutes are basically turned off and weak,
The pelvic floor is forced to overcompensate. It has to act as a primary pelvic stabilizer, taking on loads and stress it was never anatomically designed to carry alone.
wow. The sources note that weak glutes actively exacerbate a weak pelvic floor. The recommended fix is practicing co-contractions.
Yes, by intentionally engaging your glutes and your pelvic floor at the same time during exercises, you facilitate neurological remapping.
You are literally rewiring your brain's motor patterns to fire those specific muscle groups as a synchronized team.
You are teaching the nervous system that these muscles belong together in the kinetic chain.
This raises a very practical question about execution, though. How do you actually know you are activating the pelvic floor correctly? Because reading through the BC Women's and Brooks rehab sources, they practically beg people to stop just squeezing their inner thighs or clenching their buttocks and calling it a pelvic floor contraction.
It is arguably the most common mistake made in pelvic floor rehabilitation. People know they need to squeeze something down there, so they just aggressively clench every single muscle in their lower half.
They squeeze their butt cheeks together, lock their knees, and hold their breath.
Which, ironically, just spikes the intra-abdominal pressure we are trying to manage. To truly isolate the pelvic floor, the clinical advice is highly specific.
Okay, what is it?
You need to focus purely on the internal sensation of squeezing and lifting the muscles, specifically around the anus and the vagina. Mechanically, it should feel exactly like the physical effort you make to stop the flow of urine midstream, or to hold in passing gas in a crowded room.
It's just that subtle internal lift up into the pelvis.
Yes.
If your abs are aggressively crunching forward, or your thighs are shaking, or your glutes are doing 100% of the work, you've missed the target muscle group entirely.
Exactly. Transitioning from this anatomical theory to practical application in the gym is where the Pelvic Floor First program really shines.
They provide a brilliant 10-step guide to modifying a workout routine to protect and rehabilitate these muscles.
And one of the most fascinating biomechanical tips they offer is about foot stance. They advise keeping your feet close together, no wider than hip width apart.
I saw that and immediately wondered why the distance between my shoes would matter to the internal muscles of my pelvis.
It comes down to the physical anatomy of your femurs and your pelvis. When you stand with your feet wide apart, like in a sumo squat or a wide stance deadlift, your femurs rotate outward.
And this external rotation physically pulls taut the ligaments and muscles attached to your pelvis. It essentially stretches the hammock horizontally.
Right. When a hammock is stretched completely tight across its anchors, it has far less capacity to contract and lift upward against the downward force of the weight.
So when your feet are closer together, the hammock isn't pulled as taut, making it mechanically easier to activate, contract, and lift those pelvic floor muscles to support your internal organs during the exertion.
That is a remarkably subtle but brilliant adjustment. Just bring your stance in a few inches.
They also recommend lifting weights from waist height, like off a rack, rather than deadlifting them all the way from the floor to avoid extreme flexion angles that spike pressure.
And whenever possible, they suggest choosing supported positions. So instead of doing a standing overhead shoulder press, which requires massive core stabilization, sit on a firm exercise ball and perform the movement.
Right, because sitting on the ball physically supports the perineum. It provides tactile physical feedback against the pelvic floor, making it far easier to actually feel those internal muscles working, while naturally promoting the activity of the deep core.
The sources are also incredibly clear on which specific exercises to embrace and which to avoid while you are actively in a rehabilitation phase.
The good list includes exercises that integrate the supporting cast we discussed without creating massive downward pressure spikes. Glute bridges are heavily featured.
Yes, and Collective Motion Health suggests a really clever modification for the bridge. Place a small Pilates ball between your knees and actively squeeze it while you lift your hips.
Because squeezing the ball fires up your adductors, your inner thigh muscles, and because of how the adductors connect to the pelvis, firing them helps automatically facilitate a stronger pelvic floor contraction.
Other excellent options on the good list are bird dogs, which train cross-body core stability while keeping the spine neutral and avoiding downward organ pressure. They also recommend wall push-ups and clamshells to safely target the glutes.
Now we have to look at the bad list, or at least the not right now list. The Continence Foundation of Australia issues a very strong warning against intense abdominal exercises.
They do. They specifically call out sit-ups, crunches, V-sits, and full planks on your hands and feet.
If you think about the physics of a full plank, your abdominal wall is parallel to the floor. Gravity is pulling your internal organs directly down against a weakened abdominal wall while your muscles are fighting to brace.
Which creates an immense spike in unmanaged intra-abdominal pressure that gets shoved straight down into the pelvic region.
Deep squats are also on the warning list because they leave the pelvic hammock completely exposed under maximum load at the deepest point of flexion.
When you synthesize all of these strict guidelines from the different physical therapists and medical boards, the overarching philosophy for the listener becomes very clear.
Right, you have to train for your weakest link. You cannot train for the strength of your quads if your pelvic floor can't handle the load.
It is not about throwing your hands up in despair and abandoning the gym forever. It is an exercise in checking your ego at the door. You have to reduce the load on the bar.
You have to find what the sources call your starting blocks.
The starting block concept from the pelvic floor exercises source is crucial for long-term success. It's about finding your honest, current baseline.
Can you hold a proper, isolated pelvic floor contraction for just 2 seconds before it fatigues? Great, that 2-second hold is your starting block.
You don't jump to holding it for 10 seconds while swinging a heavy kettlebell. You apply progressive overload and build endurance slowly, just like you would with any other muscle in your body.
You treat it like a legitimate muscle rehabilitation program. You integrate the pelvic floor into your broader core routine rather than treating it like this weird, embarrassing, isolated entity that only exists when you are sitting at traffic lights doing random kegels.
And when you integrate it properly, using the piston breathing, engaging the glutes, firing the TVA, you realize that weightlifting isn't the enemy of pelvic health.
Safe, mindful resistance training is actually the vehicle for rehabilitation.
Exactly.
To summarize this entire deep dive, your pelvic floor is not a fragile, delicate piece of glass that forces you to live a life terrified of picking up heavy objects.
It is a highly dynamic, resilient part of your core musculature.
When you train it with proper breathing mechanics, consciously engage your glutes, and actively manage that internal pressure canister, you can absolutely support and accelerate your recovery through weightlifting.
This exploration raises a really important physiological question, though, and it's a thought I want to leave you with, based on a specific warning from the Continence Foundation of Australia.
Oh, what's that?
We spent a lot of time talking about gaining strength, lifting, and contracting. But the foundation warns that a healthy pelvic floor absolutely must be flexible.
Okay.
It needs to be able to relax fully and yield, just as much as it needs to contract and lift. They point out that constant bracing leads to chronically stiff, dysfunctional, and painful pelvic floor muscles.
Constant bracing, like holding tension in your jaw but in your pelvis?
Think about modern fitness culture. and the everyday societal expectations we place on bodies. We are constantly conditioned to suck it in. Keep your core tight.
Oh, to walk around all day with a rigidly braced, flat stomach purely for aesthetic
Right,
reasons?
so a huge portion of the population is just walking around with their core completely clenched like a fist for 10 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
If a skeletal muscle needs to be flexible, to function properly, to drop down dynamically when we breathe in, to relax completely so we can live without chronic pelvic pain, could our deep cultural obsession with a flat, constantly braced stomach actually be the very thing systematically destroying our body's internal support system?
Are we sacrificing our functional biological foundation just to project a certain aesthetic on the outside?
It really makes you wonder.
That is a staggering biomechanical thought to end on, because if you are constantly sucking it in at the grocery store or the office, that internal pressure cooker has zero release valve all day long.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As you head back to the gym or just go about your normal day, remember to listen to the feedback your body gives you.
Don't be afraid to drop the weight plates and focus heavily on your form.
Breathe deeply through those heavy lifts. Consciously let your abdomen relax when it needs to, and keep exploring the fascinating hidden mechanics of your own anatomy. After all, you wouldn't drive your car across the country with a broken suspension system, so don't ignore the one carrying you through life.